pressure and that kind of stuff. So that's my big rant about that. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes from marine mammal training. I don't know that it actually is done purely positive. I think that would vary depending on the locations that it's done and the people that do it. I think that there would be a big spectrum of people and the training different marine mammals in different ways. I think there would be a huge spectrum of that, just like there is in dogs. And I'll bet that there's people who are overly compulsive and treat those animals like shit. And I bet that there's people who are wonderful and don't have no reliable behaviors, but the animals have a wonderful existence, right? I'll bet that there's everything in between that as well. But I think that their relevance to us in the dog training community is limited. I think that there's interesting stuff we can take from it, but we shouldn't be basing too much of what we do on they do.
I think that was a very well worded rant. I enjoyed sitting back and listening to how prepared you were for it and how much thought you actually engaged in the whole concept around it. Interesting, and I do agree with you. I think that there are some very similar parallels in training marine animals and dogs, but parallels don't mean identical matches. I think I mentioned it a while ago when I was very, very interested as a younger trainer in wolves, and I spent a long time reading all the material and researching wolves and buying all the books. I think in the end I gave away most of the books I had because they weren't really relevant, because somebody who was a trainer who was involved in wolves and gave me some great advice back then said, mate, I know they're fascinating and I know that a lot of young trainers want to get enriched into the livelihood of wolves, and it's fascinating some of the things that we've learned about them through science. However, they're not dogs and they're different, and the domestication of dogs and wolves is completely different, and you won't find many people who have spent time successfully training wolves like you would dogs. He said, if I can give you some sound advice, spend more of your time focusing on the domesticated dog. And he said, I think you will find better fulfillment and you will succeed a lot more than wasting time researching wolves, unless you're going to be involved in wolves in some way, shape or form. I remember when I got to interview Dr. Robert Sapolsky, and he was speaking about how he was frustrated that he spent so much time researching one region of the brain and really dedicated a large portion of his life to doing so, where he really felt that he was more suited and would have got a lot more out of his career if he'd only spent that time on the prefrontal cortex of the brain. He said, that's really where it was at. I didn't know that at the time. I think he said he was spending most of his years on the hippocampus. So we can be misled with a lot of ways that we're thinking about things. We think that they have importance. We think that they have a very strong, when I talk about parallels, we think they can have very strong matches, but find that there's some relevance, but not all the relevance that we need to endorse ourselves or create ourselves or map ourselves as better trainers. And when you're trying to create that scaffolding around who you need to become in order to develop yourself as a trainer, yes, it's interesting.